through 120, and Sierra Plumas Joint and Unified, item on page 121 through 123.
Okay, and we'll take those items as action items down the agenda. Okay? Again, in the interest of all those professional players who have given up their life to get ready for this game, we go ahead and get us started, Ms. Silverman, on items that do not require vote. So,
we can actually get started on Executive Officer Statement. So we want to give the board an update on a few items that occurred during the month. First, we actually are providing some facility hardship funds to projects, and that actually represents 7 projects in the consent agenda, which is great news for those folks who have those health and safety issues. And those districts, once the board does approve those items, they have 90 days to come in for their fund release. And again, they have to have contracts in place and all the other requirements that also include labor compliance. And in addition to that, they have to submit that fund release by January 22nd, 2013. The next item we want to give the board an update is we actually released a significant amount of cash in June, and that represent over $637 million for priorities and funding. And we did provide the board an update that the deadline was looming at the last board meeting. That deadline has passed as of September 25th. We had numerous projects that did come in. Out of that 637, we had $615.5 million that actually submitted fund releases. That represent 192 projects. So that's actually a 98% success rate. And we actually had 4 projects that didn't make it, unfortunately. And those projects were put on the bottom of the unfunded list. The next item we wanted to update with the board is the cash set aside for the charter program. We actually had a discussion in June, and the discussion really centered on whether or not we want to keep cash for those projects or for that program so they could move forward with advanced site and design fund releases. At that time, they had some challenges, and we had only $30-something million, over $30 million that was released, but we still have $57 million that was parked that had not been released. Since the board did provide an extension through December, we actually had projects come in, and they actually accessed the cash, so that has been a success. That's been great for those folks. We actually had 9 projects that have been released for funds, 2 projects in the consent agenda today, and 3 more next month.
Ms. Moore.
Lisa, are there more projects that want to access that cash than we have, or have you received more than the cash yet?
I think currently this is all that we received, but we would definitely give the board an update if we have some more projects come in.
Okay,
right.
Thank you.
And another item we wanted to advise the board, obviously the board did adopt regulations to change the method of how we accept funding applications for the modernization and new construction program once we've exhausted the bond authority. With that, there's obviously some conditions associated with those projects when they do move forward and we don't have bond authority. The board actually wanted to give them an update about some of the outreach events that we've held and we will be holding. We've actually provided some updates in our communication on a monthly basis in our building blocks, our newsletter. We've had a presentation yesterday. Juan and I actually had a presentation a few weeks ago at a venue for school districts. So we'll have some items posted on the webpage, which will be pretty comprehensive about FAQs and other material that could be helpful for school districts. And we'll also repost some of our web presentations. So if there are any additional questions about how the process will work once we've exhausted those funds and the regulations are in effect, we definitely will have material available to assist school districts. And feel free to call anybody at the OPSC, and we can definitely help you through the process. The last item I wanted to share is the Office of Administrative Law order to show cause. On April 16, 2012, the Office of Administrative Law received a request from Senate Rules Committee to clarify the legality of the 60% commensurate regulations. On October 17th, staff did receive a response from the Office of Administrative Law order to show cause, and they actually determined that the 60% commensurate regulation has met the necessity standard and is legal. So with that, I'll open up to any questions.
Thank you. Any questions? No. I know there's some folks that want to talk on the public comment section, but if we can wait until we establish a quorum for that, because you probably want to have all the members present to make your statement, I'd appreciate that. Do we need to go to tab 3?
We just concluded tab 3.
done.
Yeah. We
Any
can-
public comment on either tab 2 or 3? Okay.
We can move to tab 6, which
Tab
is
6.
updates on the releases of the funds.
Please.
So we've actually, if you go to page 126, we have a summary of the funds that we have dispersed in the month of September. And again, most of the activity did center around the bond sale, the last bond sale. We released $207 million in the month of September. Next month, we actually will be introducing a new chart because we actually did have a bond sale in October 2012, and that will represent those projects that will be moving forward for the next priority and funding round. And that the new chart will actually reflect the $224 million that we did receive in Proposition 1D. On page 129, as I shared with you earlier, we actually do have a graphic illustration of those projects trying to tie into those projects that didn't meet the 90-day requirement. We dispersed quite a bit of funds in September, but we also do show the projects that did expire. 4 projects expired that represents $22 million. And with that, I will open up to any questions.
Any questions from board members? Comments from public? Senator Hancock, welcome. Okay. So why don't we go back to tab 1? Ms. Jones, if we can establish a quorum, please.
Certainly. Senator Lowenthal? Senator Hancock? Here. Senator Weiland? Assemblymember Brownlee? Assemblymember Buchanan? Here. Assemblymember Hagman? Esteban Almanza?
Here.
Kathleen Moore? Here. Cesar Diaz?
Here.
Pedro Reyes?
Present.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. And I'll now invite folks who wanted to make a public comment to the board on items not in the agenda. Seeing none, we move on. And is there the minutes? You have the minutes before you. Is there a motion on the minutes? Moved and seconded. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? I have it. Thank you. We did tab 3. We move on. We did tab resolution of delegation of authority, tab 4.
We're actually presented delegation of authority in my stead, so Juan could actually sign some documents when I'm not in the office. So it's not an action item; it's just an acknowledgement from the board.
Okay. In his recent promotion, so he now has signature authority. Congratulations, Mr. Mireles. Tab 5.
It's a consent agenda.
Minus the Scotia and the Sierra Plumas Unified School District issues.
And then I'll be voting on the consent agenda with the exception of the Elk Grove Unified School District item.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Richard Gonzalez and Associates.
Mike.
Yes, Richard Gonzalez of Richard Gonzalez and Associates, representing Sierra Plumas Unified School District. We understood that the special item, the discussion item, was being held over, not the consent item.
Correct. Yes,
Posted that.
that is correct. But it's the item that's a consent is moved to the action, and the item that we previously had as an action is being held over. Yes. Okay. Okay, with that, so we've moved those 2 items, and we pull those 2 items, and for now, we'll pull the Elk Grove as well, and we can have a vote on that, and then we go back and do the Elk Grove.
And if there isn't, I have been advised that if there isn't a quorum later, then I will vote on the Elk Grove. If another member comes and votes, then it's preferable not to.
Okay. So on the consent item, minus those 3 items, is there a motion? It's been moved, and there's a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. Okay, And so we'll show that all those opposed, the nays, carries. Now, on the Elk Grove consent item, is there a motion? Has it been moved?
Second.
Seconded. And we will show a 5-0 vote, and we keep it open. Thank you. Item 8 has been postponed. Item 9, no, went too far. Gotta go back.
Sure, if you want.
Appeals, so, action items, right?
Right.
Okay. So
The
now
first one starts on page 188, tab 10. The board had requested staff to draft regulatory amendments in September to clarify the manner in which the board can release funds pursuant to the labor code. Sorry, Mr. Chair, did you want to go through the other consent items first?
Well, I don't, the consent has been approved.
I'm sorry, Scotia and Sierra Plumas.
Let's do Scotia. Okay.
So the Scotia item is basically to answer any questions related to the facility hardship application.
Tab, well, the Scotia item gets moving to the action tab by default.
Right, right. And what was being presented in the consent agenda was actually the facility hardship application. And so, Michael, if you want to walk through that.
Michael Watanabe, Office of Public School Construction.
Hold on, Michael. Let the record show Mr. Hagman has joined us. Thank you, sir. I apologize, Michael. Please proceed.
Could you advise what page the Scotia item
Certainly.
is on?
We are in the consent agenda, page 118.
Thank you.
This is an amended conceptual approval for Scotia Union High at their Stanwood Murphy School. The board previously approved a conceptual approval for this district's project back in 2011. At the Stanwood Murphy School, the heat was provided by Pacific Lumber Company, who previously owned the school site. It was later purchased by the school district when the lumber company went out of business. Since that time, the district has not had heat provided by that lumber company no longer. So the conceptual approval previously approved was to provide boiler systems for the classroom building and for this gymnasium building. Now, the district was taking time to get through the Division of State Architect with the plans to do that for these two buildings. The classroom building actually moved through DSA faster, so what staff administratively did was split this into two components. The first component the board approved last month for conceptual approval for the classroom building. This is the second half of the conceptual approval for the gym building. This project will be for installation of the boiler system for the gym to provide the heat for the gym building. And in addition, it will also provide funding for SEISMIC upgrades to the building. Currently, they do have financial hardship approval for this project, so the total estimated cost of the project is $4,052,500, of which 100% would be state funded once the district comes in with a funding application. With this financial hardship approval and this amended conceptual approval, the board would be approving a separate design unfunded approval today. That amount is on page 120. $364,000 would be the state share for the design funding for this project, so they can continue the planning. $218,000 would be funded as financial hardship. Now, with the board's approval, this project would be placed on the top of the unfunded list in date order. The board moved facility hardships up to there, and they would be able to participate in the priority funding come January.
Okay. Senator Hancock.
Thank you. Yeah, I had originally pulled this. I understand the issues of facility hardship, which are health problems related to mold and other things. And I understand that at a previous meeting, we approved financial hardship. I would like to know, however, and would ask you to please include in future agenda items like this, under what criteria there was financial hardship. Because I think the board needs to know about what the local participation is and the local contribution as the bond is winding down and as we're making these allocation decisions. Now, in asking more questions about this, I understand that it's a roof replacement, that it's a flat roof building, that it's been replaced 2 other times. This will be the 3rd replacement. And my concern, quite honestly, is at what point does this board have an interest in saying if, in fact, you can't get a flat roof that's going to keep mold out of the building because of the snow in the winter, do we encourage, require, ask for either better insulation in the roof? I understand there are some schools in that area that don't have the mold problem because they have a heating element in the roof that melts the snow. Or it would cost more money, I understand, to make a roof that would be slanted, but if we're replacing the roof over and over again at state expense, that doesn't seem to make sense either, unless the district wants to step up and pay their 40% or 50%. If they don't, how can they qualify for financial hardship? I just think there's a number of policy areas that the board needs to think about, particularly as we move forward from here. And as I said, I understand it's sort of a moot point here, but in the future I'd just like to know in the agenda item, and I do think there are policies that we need to consider.
May I? We actually, the item that we're speaking to is Scotia, which it doesn't have a roof issue. Actually, Sierra Plumas is the next item that we're prepared to speak to.
I'm talking about Scotia. No?
Scotia is just for the boiler and seismic.
Oh, it's the boiler in the gym.
Yeah.
Gotcha. So, okay, so it's a different financial hardship issue then, and I have no idea what the issues are around there, and I just would like to have them included in the agenda item.
Yeah, and just to clarify, Scotia Union, they actually met the merits of the regulations and the criteria to qualify for the program. So one of the criteria is whether or not they leveled the developer fees, and in fact, they had a need assessment analysis.
I'm sorry.
They had a need assessment analysis, and the other criteria in which they qualify for is whether or not they had a bonded indebtedness of less than $5 million, and in fact, they did meet the criteria. So
what does that mean? They did have bonded indebtedness, or they did not?
Bonding capacity.
Less
Bonding
than
capacity,
less
okay.
than $5 million. So based on that criteria, staff within its administrative authority could grant the status because they met the criteria. But we can definitely put additional information as far as what's being presented here. But I'm not sure whether or not what criteria we want to bring back for evaluation.
Well, I'm not either, because I'm not familiar with the administrative regulations that you use to make the administrative decision. So I guess I would simply ask if you could just send my office what the regulations are for an administrative decision regarding financial hardship, because, again, that would be something that would be in the policy purview of this board to look at. And then I am also interested in how Scotia qualified for your administrative decision to do financial hardship.
We can certainly do that.
Because it's 100% state money.
I should clarify that on this design apportionment that the district will be receiving, they are contributing about $25,000 of their own funds to that design fund, because that's all they had.
Just in the interest of transparency, I think it would be good for the board to know that.
Okay, so if you can circle back with the senator's staff and provide them the process or the guidelines that you follow to determine the administrative part of this review and why they end up in the consent calendar as opposed to an appeal. Because when they don't fall into this category is when we see it as an appeal process. And so if we could have that conversation with the senator, that'd be great. Ms. McGinnis.
I would just I think what the senator's asking, and I tend to agree, is that we just routinely, in the future, if we have financial hardship, note what the qualifying criteria is, whether it's consent or whether it's appeal, but we know why we have that recommendation. And I would also say to the senator, we had a lengthy meeting this morning, talking about this informational meeting moving forward, and you know, I do think that these are areas where we need to take a look at them, you know, over the next year or so as we move forward to make sure that we're truly getting our money where we have the greatest need.
Well, with that, I mean, is there an interest by the board that all financial hardships come to the board instead of being on the consent calendar, or is there an interest on keeping it in the consent calendar as long as additional information is provided?
Leaving the consent calendar.
Okay.
Mr. Hagman likes to move the meeting. I think it's fine for them to stay on the consent calendar. This is an example, though, where truly when we say things in simple language or when we, whatever, I think I will certainly be grateful to have the regulatory framework by which these administrative decisions are made, and I do think they should be routinely cited in items that are on the consent calendar where financial hardship has been given.
Okay. You know, just as a side conversation, you had a great meeting this morning, and staff prepared a fabulous document that I wish I had read a year and a half ago. I really think you should provide a copy of that document not only to all the board members, but also when the next crop of members come in to replace the outgoing members, that should be a document they get. Because you went through, gave a lot of good history, the process, and your examples on how it's calculated. So it's not a random number or a Ouija board calculation, but there's actually some thought and different programs or components of the program that are funded. And I think that's a primer for anybody sitting on this board should have. And so I compliment staff for the work on this, and thank you, Ms. Buchanan, for the presentation you had going on this morning. But anyway, sidebar. Okay, so your comments on Scotia and they apply also to Sierra. Is there a motion to approve those two? Ms. Buchanan?
How old is the roof on Sierra that we are replacing?
The last roof they put on was in 1990.
So we're
22 years.
22 years ago. Yeah. Well,
I'll move it.
It's been moved by Mr. Hagman, second by Ms. Buchanan. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. Abstentions? None. Ayes have it. Thank you. Did we lift the roll call on Elk Grove? We need to, if we could, please. Ms. Moore abstained because of Elk Grove, and you're the missing vote, sir. Call the absent members, please.
Assemblymember Hagman. Thank you. Motion carries.
All right. Thank you. I'm sorry, kind of jumped the gun. Is there any public comment on the prior two items? No. Thank you. Okay, moving on then. Sierra Plumas, this is the issue that's been pulled. Number 10, school facility program regulatory amendments. Ms. Silverman. It's an action item.
Apologize for getting a little ahead of myself there, Mr. Chair. I think I got a little bit excited about the delegation of authority item. Tab 10, page 188. The board asked us to come back to draft regulatory amendments that would clarify the manner in which funds could be released pursuant to certain labor code requirements. Currently, any school district that awards contracts prior to the beginning of this year, and if they receive funds from Proposition 47 or 55, they have to have either a Department of Industrial Relations in-house labor compliance program, or they have to have contracted with a DIR-approved third-party provider, third-party labor compliance provider. We've had situations where districts have contracted with the third-party labor compliance provider sometime after the construction contract was awarded. In those situations, staff has determined that the district didn't comply with the labor code requirements. So what these regulations do is they clarify that under certain situations, districts that do enter into a contract with a third-party labor compliance provider after the construction contract, they may still be in compliance with the labor code and thus qualifying for a fund release. So if I could direct you to page 190, the mechanism that is created is districts that have this situation can contract with a separate third-party labor compliance provider to verify that the performance of the applicable labor compliance program duties were performed within 1 month after the construction started. We've been hearing from school districts that just because I contracted with a third-party provider after the construction contract, it doesn't mean that we were not in compliance with the labor code. So what the regulations do, it gives districts an opportunity to be able to demonstrate that even though this third-party labor compliance provider came on board sometime after the construction contract, that they can still demonstrate that they met the provisions in the labor code. So we have this 30-day period, and again, this is specific to the applicable labor compliance labor compliance program duties that were performed 1 month after. There's also a written record that the labor compliance program's confirmation of monthly payroll records for the project, and there's a notification to the employees of the project that the district is making the certification, and if they have any concerns regarding the accuracy of the report, they can notify OPSE and DIR. And the report also goes to OPSE and DIR for review. If we don't hear back from the Department of Industrial Relations that the findings in the report are incorrect, then the project qualifies for funding and we will release the funds. Again, this is a mechanism for districts to once again be able to demonstrate that they were in compliance even though the third-party provider came on board sometime after the construction contract.
Been moved by Mr. Hagman. Is there a second? A second. Any comments? Questions from board members? Comments from the public?
Good afternoon, Lyle Smoot. I have some questions about this, and the first one is it would be nice if this could be sent back to the implementation committee for a discussion about these issues before they're adopted, just because I believe there is still ambiguity in this language that is going to be misunderstood by school districts and that will cause further problems. At least if it went through the implementation committee, all of those issues could be discussed, and maybe it could be at least better clarified exactly what the intent is here. Amongst other things, this 30-day time period, I'm not sure exactly when that time period starts and when it ends and stuff like that, just because of the ambiguity of the language. And so it'd be nice if it could go through the implementation committee to figure out exactly what's going on if this thing works. I don't quite understand why there's a second third-party provider that's going to be involved, and I don't know what that third-party provider is going to give you as verification. That term leaves me going, what is verification? So just asking to go to the imp committee. Yes, it is a 1 month delay, but I think it's worthy. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Good afternoon. I'm Jenny Hanna from Kern County. We operated a third-party labor compliance program for quite some time, and as most of you may be aware, DIR no longer recognizes third-party providers. We maintain our own labor compliance certification, but we're no longer a third party, and that's true for the rest of the programs in the state. So some clarification of what you intend here in terms of third party, if that's just an independent set of eyes, maybe there's some different terminology you need to look at. I also have concerns about the 1 month reference in the documentation. I know that follows labor code in terms of timing and review of payroll records. However, I think it seems to me the sense here is that you're trying to help districts that fall in this weird gap, and I'm not sure that the 30 days is helpful in that regard. Does that mean that you intend for the district to have an LCP in place at that time, or that just that they've been collecting certified payrolls? We know that a big part of the discrepancy with LCP is that in terms of not having it in place is there's noticing requirements when you do your bidding and notification to the workers on the project. And I know that's intrinsic in the compliance regulations. However, I'm not sure that that can't be served at a later point in the project. No one is building projects that I'm aware of without prevailing wage. This is the compliance piece of it. So I agree. I think there maybe needs to be a little more careful language here just to make sure that you're getting what you intend to have with this recommendation. So thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Bruce Hancock, Hancock Park in DeLong. I also want to comment on the 30 days. I would like to preface my comments, though, by expressing my appreciation and thanks to the staff and to the Department of Industrial Relations for working hard on this problem and bringing forward a solution. It's greatly appreciated, and I would not want my comments to be taken as any criticism of that effort, but simply as an effort to clarify. I am a little bit concerned about the wording regarding the 30-day compliance, as others have already spoken to. Essentially, it boils down to simply the question of, could these regulations be read to say that the third-party labor compliance provider must have been in place within 30 days of the signing of the contract? If they can be read that way, then I think they should state that, because if that's the case, then they will not help many districts. If that's not the case, and it's only to say that such things as certified payroll are reviewed for the entire length of the project, with the exception possibly of the first 30 days, then I think that's not a problem, because the circumstances I'm aware of, such reviews were done for all payroll on the projects. So it's not, this is not an issue of avoiding labor compliance. It's an issue of just trying to help people who did not engage their third-party providers within a 30-day period. Some of them may have been many months after the signing of the contract, but we do believe that in the cases I'm aware of, we can show that the labor compliance requirements and labor code requirements were implemented and carried out on the project nonetheless. So it's the 30-day time period that does cause a little bit of concern regarding exactly what that means and how it might be interpreted. Thank you very much.
Okay. Questions from board members? Speak at it. Staff, you want to comment?
Sure.
Or anybody wants to? Go ahead.
First of all, I do want to say that we've been working very closely with the Department of Industrial Relations on these regulations. To Mr. Hancock's point, the regulations do not say that the third-party labor compliance program provider has to be in place 30 days after the commencement of the work. What the regulations do say is that the applicable duties of a labor compliance program were performed 30 days after the commencement of work. So I wanted to clarify that.
Diaz.
I'd like to commend staff and the folks over at the DIR for their good work on these regulations. Obviously, these provide an avenue for school districts that are currently finding themselves in non-compliance to access the state grant to actually look at some of their actual examples and allow them to fit where they actually intended to come into compliance with the state statute. So I commend you for working on this. These good regs. Thank you.
Okay. We have it's been moved and second.
Moved by Mr. Diaz?
No, I think Mr. Hagman moved it.
Oh, Mr. Hagman
Yes.
moved it. Okay.
Okay. All in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Ayes have it. Thank you. Tab 11.
Tab 11.
Good afternoon, Barbara Campminer with the Office of Public School Construction. Tab 11 is the non-participation in the priority funding process item. And this item is brought back at the request of the board at the August 2012 board meeting. It was requested that this topic come back as an action item to consider addressing the issue of those projects on the list of unfunded approvals that have had opportunities to participate in the priority funding process but have chosen not to. Currently, there are 165 projects totaling $413 million for which certifications have not been submitted under at least 2 priority funding certification filing periods. And if I can direct your attention to page 201, there's a chart at the top of the page there that shows the breakdown of those projects by the type of bond authority. One thing to note before we get into the options that staff has put together for the board is that for the charter school, the overcrowding relief grant, and the career technical education programs, any of the bond authority that would be returned to the programs by removal from the unfunded list goes back to the respective programs and would not be of assistance to any new construction or modernization projects that may be waiting for the authority. In addition, the charter school authority goes back to the individual projects that have reservations of funds. Also, the charter school and career tech programs have built-in funding mechanisms that allow for them to not come to the board with a construction-ready project, and the charter school projects that are at the top of the unfunded list represent the design and site apportionment amounts that the board took action previously to put them on the top of this list because it was a fix to allow them to access cash for these purposes. So removing them from the list reverts it back to the original problem of the design and site apportionments not being accessible with the new mechanism of providing cash to projects. So those are some things that board members may wish to keep in mind as we go through the options.
So under your scenario then is if we do anything, then it would only apply to new construction, modernization, basically. Mr. Savage, is that?
I think that if we look at what different types of projects are on the list and the different program requirements for those projects, it's important that we recognize that the CTE projects, especially with the reservation of funds and the special nature of those projects, not be included in any kind of item like this. So I would recommend, Mr. Chair, that if we consider it, we use the new construction modernization as the basics.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Hagman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just kind of administratively, as districts got on the priority funding list and they actually have written in and say, we don't want to be on it no more, is there some written letters coming in? What do you do and how do you move people up? How do you get the money back in the system, that sort of thing?
We've actually received just email notifications or calls, but no one actually has taken the action to ask for the projects to be rescinded. You technically have to request the project to be rescinded, and we haven't taken that formal action yet because we haven't received a formal notification to rescind.
But they give you a phone call or email, and we do have the stuff in limbo, and it's for them, they may think we're done with it because we can't go forward anymore. We're still thinking we haven't got the formal letter yet. Is there a way possibly for us to initiate this, say we received your phone call, we received your email, saying we went off the list, to close that section out, just so we can keep things as updated as possible? Even if they don't officially write it on letterhead, whatever, I mean, we should be able to close things out somehow.
Actually, I believe that there are at least one that we know of that have submitted a letter to rescind the project because it's no longer a viable project. And what we've seen is a letter saying that this project, that we're no longer moving forward with this project, and then that what happens is we rescind the project, basically put the authority back into the respective program, and also the pupil grant, to the eligibility for that project. But it's very rare.
Ms. Buchanan.
So indulge me for a minute. Projects go on the list, and once we approve them, we reserve bonding authority for those projects, right? Which means, and we are not going to have reserve bonding authority for projects beyond what are bonding capacity is, all right? So we match up our bonding authority with our bonding capacity. And if a project is on the list and stays on the list, and we're reserving that authority, but for whatever reason, they're not going to go forward. I mean, maybe enrollment's down and they don't need the new school, or maybe they don't have, maybe they have got bonding authority, but they don't have bonding capacity for their 50% match. I mean, there could be a whole variety of reasons why they don't have it, but they stay on the list, and we keep them there. And so, and if I were on the school board, or any of you, there's really not much of an incentive to take my project off the list, because what if something happens a couple years from now and all of a sudden they start building? I don't want to go back to the bottom of the list. So it seems to me that, we've had this goal through the priorities and funding that we try and get money out to projects as soon as we can. So we're building classrooms, so we're modernizing, and which is good for the children in those schools and good for the economy. And yet we have this problem where we've got authority and capacity, and we're kind of pretty close to hitting that maximum. I mean, this is not where we've got another $5 billion, and it really doesn't matter. So my question is there something we can do in terms of whether we keep two lists or whether we move to bottom or whatever, but I can see where we're in a collision course here that's going to happen pretty darn soon if we, continue just to hold this money for projects that may or may not materialize when other schools have need. And so I don't know exactly what the answer is. We've talked about this. Everyone wants us to leave the projects there so we show the need. We've talked about, well, do we still have to demonstrate that you have current DSA approval, because you can only extend the authority for your plans a certain number of times, or do you have to show that you've got bonding capacity or whatever? But I think we're going to have to reconcile this, because if not, we're going to have projects there that stay on and other projects that should be funded that won't be funded.
I think the first time I heard about this was just slightly over a year ago. We had this conversation. At that time, people referred to it as the dead wood. Folks who just sit in the pipeline without really moving, but obstructing the flow of cash. And so staff has, at our request, came back and is now providing us options of if we want to move forward with different options. And I think that's sort of where Barbara was when I interrupted.
I'd be happy to give a brief overview of the options if you'd like. We have put together some options. Now, these were discussed in part at the Cash Management Subcommittee back in 2011. We've brought them back because we did get some stakeholder input and heard from subcommittee members about the options at that time. So some of these might seem a little bit familiar, but under option 1, the concept would be to continue the priority funding process, but allow districts a certain number of times to choose not to participate, and after that number of times has gone past, then they would risk rescission of their project. So, and the board could choose to start that immediately or at a date in the future. So you could say the next priority certification filing round is going to be business as usual, but after that we're going to count every priority funding round opportunity as an opportunity, and once you've reached 2, 3, 4, whatever number the board decides on, after that, then your opportunities have passed and your project is rescinded. One thing to keep in mind on option 1 is that currently the regulations say that if you skip a priority funding round, if you submit a fund release request for a priority funding round and you do not, one more time. If you submit a certification for a priority funding round and then you do not follow up with the fund release request, there's no penalty other than that you go back onto the unfunded approvals list with a lower date. So you still remain within that group of projects for which bond authority has been reserved. So if the board chooses to go down this path with option 1, you may wish to consider whether or not you want folks to go back on the list at the end of the final number of times you can pass up. Otherwise, you might have folks submitting, not perfecting on the fund release, and then they just keep coming back on and off the list.
One comment on that, I would say it was, at the time when we considered it, it was a penalty to have to go to the bottom, because that meant that you were not able, I mean, some other people ahead of you in the next round that might not have been ahead of you in the round that you didn't perfect on, would be ahead of you. So we did view that as a penalty. I think now you're talking more about, it's not a penalty within bond authority necessarily. Correct. They still remain in bond authority, but they're at the bottom of the list, which is not an enviable place to be when we're competing for cash.
Agreed. Thank you.
But you still tie up the bond authority, right? Yeah. And so that's kind of, we're coming to the bottom of the bond authority, to the bottom of all resources. So that's sort of the next conversation. Go ahead.
Well, contextually, this was a very successful program of partnering with school districts on a piece of law that indicated they had 18 months to perfect their program. And we ran into trouble with, I think, with those that were issuing bonds to say, look, we need to have we need to know that cash is going out into communities. And so it was in partnership that we said the 90 days would voluntarily replace the 18 months. And we're still contextually in a cash poor environment in which we had, what, 200 million, 250, 240, this last bond measure, that we had 600 million worth of projects line up for. So we can't cover cash-wise right now yet. We have not ever been to a place where we've had more cash than projects. So that is a contextual environment that I think is in a voluntary program of this 90 days is important. And the other piece of that is, as we move forward, to me, an important piece of information would be on the ones that have passed up at 5 times, why? I mean, we don't have that issue. We don't have that information yet. Is it valid? Is it not? Are they, as you said, reluctant to get off the list, even though they should get off the list? That kind of information would be of importance, I think, as we consider this as well.
Mr. Buchanan.
I'm a big believer in data-driven decision-making, but whatever the reason, we're holding money for them, whether it's from a current bond or the future bond, we're holding money for them for a project where they're not moving forward. And so I do think we're rapidly approaching that time where we have to ask ourselves, are we going to just continue to hold? Because or are we going to make sure the money gets to projects that are ready to go forward? And, that's, one of the things with this option is that you're still potentially, we're going to hit that inflection point, and once we do that, we're just going to be holding money in the bank. And the question is we holding it for projects that we think are going to move forward soon, or are we holding it for projects that may never move forward when we could be doing something good, for other schools and for the economy?
Senator Hancock.
Yeah, I would agree with Assemblymember Buchanan. To me, and I'm coming at it also from a perspective of the state economy and the state taxpayers putting the money into this. Part of it, we want good schools built for our kids as quickly as possible, and we want to put people to work doing that. So it's a fairness issue for me in regards to those who are in line and ready to go. So I would favor option 1. There will still be a need to decide how many times the project could be passed over before it was dropped.
We have it as 4 opportunities to participate.
Is it as 4?
For example, bond sales typically take place at where could provide, yeah, it's a number. We need to decide on a number.
A number, exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. But, and I think that would depend kind of how we would time things to coincide with bond sales so we could make decisions and then get on with it. So, I don't know, 2 times, 3 times, or 4 times, right, is what?
Well, I hear a motion in there. I'd be supportive of 4 in there.
But, I mean, if we're releasing funds a couple times a year, would you go
true.
2 years
That's
before?
True.
I mean,
Never mind with the 4.
At some point in time, I don't know what the right answer is, but I do believe that we're hitting that point where projects either need to be ready to move forward, or or we need to move other projects onto the list, because some of these have already been on the list for a lengthy period of time, and I'm not, maybe we bring it back, I don't know, but I do think that to have projects stay there that may not be moving forward is just, we can still keep them on as a need, but we need to get projects on that list that need to move forward. So maybe there's an A list and a B list, and if you don't, when you're offered the funds, if you don't take them, you move to the B list, or once, but I wouldn't let it drag out for a long period of time.
So if the motion was option 1, what would you put in as the number of times that you would not be shovel-ready?
Well, like I said, we've got some projects that have already said no several times.
Yeah, we've got, I was trying to add up the things on the chart.
Well,
is it 168 total projects that have passed a certain number of times, or is it 361 projects that have passed either from 2 to 5 times?
165 have passed 2 times or more.
2 times or
So
more.
the minimum would be
okay.
2 times.
Because the numbers.
Mr. Hagman.
Mr. Chair, I'm just going to kind of look at the reality here. We're dealing with the last remnants of this bond. I mean, we're not going to have too many more issuance, maybe 1 or 2 more anyway. It makes no sense to go longer than this program may have funding. If we get a new bond issued in 2014, or when, hopefully I'll rephrase it, when, we can readjust the things. But this is kind of like we're tweaking it for the tail end of this money train. Mm-hmm. So what you want to do is, if you've gone through twice, I would say I move that you're already off because you had your chance, or you'll give them a 30 or 60-day period. If you don't have a date set and certain, let's move on. Let's get this remnant money back out to the people who are ready to go. And then when we come back to 2014, you guys readjust it any way you want. But once is enough for me at this point.
So are you saying the second time you're offered it, if you turn it down, you're off the list? I think for those that have turned it down a couple times, probably should have one last chance to either take the money or
so they give a notice.
So you would sort of bifurcate. If you pass more than twice already, you have 1 more shot. But if you have not passed on it, you have 2 shots. Is that what you're saying?
Pass once, second shot,
Okay.
Yeah. So I mean,
Well,
I think
it's
you have
option 1 with that number.
Yeah, criteria. You have 100 and whatever folks that, and I want to give them a shot. I don't want to sit there and change rules today, and all of a sudden we were putting it off to this year. You'll come in with a plan with staff, give the staff flexibility to look at those people on that list and say, you really do have a plan. We see we're going to keep you where you're at. But if they don't respond to you, you'll send them a little notice that, hey, we want to move this money along, and you've been on this list, you've been passed over X amount of times, we're going to move on, okay, per the board direction. Unless you come in and give us a plan that's feasible in the near future, we're going to get started on this thing, then, okay, take that section, put it over here. The other ones, from now on, you get passed over once, you got 2 bites of the apple. Otherwise, it's going to be after this bond program, we're out of money anyway. So,
Pedro.
And then when we get the new bond out, we'll start over again.
Could, I guess in order to support it, I would like to see that we're giving all districts notice, and so not to necessarily bifurcate those off that haven't participated yet, that they get less, because it's a new wrinkle in the program. And in fairness to all, if we're going to come up with a period of time, if it's 2, if it's 4, that all projects are subject to it, and And if they pass, the next two, then we're dealing with that. It still is an environment where we do not have enough cash for the amount of projects that do want the cash to be apportioned. And I am also wondering how much more cash do we need to close out the program? Do we know that?
Our list is currently on the financial statement, so we have definitely close to over $1 billion, if not $1.5 billion. But, I mean, put it in perspective, I think what we shared a few months ago is, as we started this priority of funding rounds, we did have a significant amount of participation once this program started back in 2010. The last certification round, we only have 52% of the draw out of those eligible. So, I mean, it's shrinking dramatically. At that time, we had $500 million that was willing to participate in the 90-day process. Was it close to $1 billion that when we initially started? No. And I think those folks who get in the room and think about bond sales, they obviously want to see what the needs of the program are. But the needs of the program is really centered around those folks who submit that certification for the 90-day round.
So we have $1.5 billion in cash needs to close out this program.
That's for the projects we have provided unfunded approvals.
Right, but we're at authority, right?
Yeah,
with some small exceptions. So we have $1.5 billion left in the program, plus a little bit more probably.
Right, 1.6 billion, over 1.6 billion.
And we just, as a state, this last year, we issued $200 million just that we're going to issue and put out to projects in December. And how much was the prior bond?
637.
So $800 million this year. So we could be about a year and a half, maybe 2 years, still in a cash world if it remains at those levels of cash that's necessary to finalize this program.
But you have to break that down into programs, because when you do that, you have programs within that could be out of money much faster. And don't you think it makes a difference to a project that's on the list? If I know I'm going to be able to participate, I may get ready to be able to go out there with the next bond issuance versus having all these ahead of me that may not be participating. So, I mean, if you want to say, okay, we're going to give everybody 2 chances, one of the criteria I would like to at least see is if you stay there, that you have bonding capacity and you have plans that are active and will remain approved. And, we know that there's that there's certain aspects there that are at least viable, because I don't think it's fair to those districts who, that want to move forward.
Back to my original suggestion, that's kind of what I was trying to say with that, is if you have this list of ones that you already passed over, we should be able to write them a letter, make a phone call, whatever, and say, look, do you want to voluntarily, this is what we're going to do if you're not ready the next time around. So if you know you're not going to be ready by next time around, tell us now. At least we can take those off the list and put them at the bottom of the list or whatever. And then, if you say you are going to be ready by the next cycle, you give us some kind of plan. Do you have the bonding authority? Do you have your plans ready? Some basic requirements so you have a sense that these schools are in the hunt to actually use this money. And that should weed out a lot of the deadwood we talked about just administratively. I don't think there has to be hard rules and codes on this necessarily, because, I want to give them the freedom. I guess we do need it in case there's some pills. But we should be able to get a lot of that out there. And then as we go through it, we should be able to get that out. So if they voluntarily write a letter or they give you the indication they're not going to have it, let's close them out somehow. At least that's the easy part, right? They're telling you they don't want to.
But why is anyone voluntarily going to write a letter?
Yeah.
There's no upside to doing that,
Well, we could simply do a notification that because we're coming to the end of the bonding authority and we have more requests, then we're going to be able to fill. If you are not ready the next time a bond is issued, you'll be dropped. And it will move to the people who are shovel ready.
So you can do the notification to everybody, and then when the money is available, then you have one shot at it, or I'm looking to see.
If there are people that are all ready, that they've got their local match, they're ready to start building.
So is that administratively, is that something that can be done? I mean, I want to make sure that staff is.
We would definitely have to clarify in regulations.
Yeah, we need to go back to regulations.
Right.
Yeah, I need to go back to regulations. So that would eat up some of the time to begin with.
Right, right. And our next certification round begins in January for a spring sale. So if we have the dialogue about regulations, make those changes. It could be, timing could be around that time. So in essence, they still have.
Okay. So whatever we decide would require regulatory changes. Right. Ms. Moore.
Are you saying that anyone that has refused funding or not availed themselves to funding at least one time, they have to ask for the January round or they're dropped? Is that what we're saying?
No, I'm just saying that that buys us time. Is if we start down the path of regulations, it's going to take some time for staff to draft that. And I understand there will be a new round starting, but by the time those regulations are made in place, potentially won't be until sometime second quarter, maybe, of next year. So the new round will start come July.
So at a minimum, they'll have 6 to 9 months advance
Correct.
notice of what's going on.
Right.
I don't want to complicate things, but I think if we're going to change the regulation, then right now we either have the priorities and funding, which is 90 days, or you revert to the old 18 months. Maybe what you need is something, if we're going to start offering and you either take the money or you dropped, you have to, begin your project within a much shorter time period than the 18 months. I mean, it's because if not, if you're not requesting to participate in a priorities and funding, aren't you then staying on the list as well?
We would, in the structure of what you're requesting, we would definitely create regulations that would, if you don't compete within the time frame that the board establishes, then the project will be rescinded.
Okay.
Yes.
The regulation has been set for priority funding, and so the moment we start tinkering with how we're going to do the process, there would be a need to actually go through the process of amending the regulations. So that's all I'm saying, because we don't want to be doing something underground on that. Thank you.
So I'm getting from the board, there's an appetite for doing a number of, as opposed to dates, but to do a number of opportunities to turn down the funding. The question then is 1 or 2 or 4, and the fewer is better. The reality is it will require a regulatory process, so it will be several months before this is in place. In that period of time, staff will then do proactive work to follow up, as Mr. Hagman suggested, to see who voluntarily wants to drop out of that, and also let folks know that this is coming and that the goal is to be ready because we are running out of resources. That's sort of what I'm hearing from the board. And the question then is 1 or 2, and I'm waiting to hear a motion.
Let's hear public comment.
Okay. Go ahead.
Thank you. Lyle Smoot again. I have an idea for you. You may or may not like it, but I think it resolves one issue. In the write-up, it says currently there is no mechanism in statute to remove a project that's been on the list of unfunded apportionments. That's always a concern. I talk to you all the time about your law. But there is a way to legally do this that resolves this issue of how many times can you do it. If you simply said, the first time you pass on a 90-day apportionment, that starts your 18-month statutory clock. At the end of the 18 months, if you haven't met the requirements and come in for a 90-day apportionment, legally you can rescind the apportionment. And that resolves all the issues about how many times. Then if a bond measure only happens once in a year or twice in a year, it doesn't matter. The 18 months clock started. There you go.
But how does that solve the problem of, that means every project that's on there will be on there for a minimum of 18 more months before you can give out money, which means we'll be holding bond authority for those projects up until the time we pass the new bond. That doesn't really solve that problem of how do we get out this money.
As I told you once before, that you can resolve that issue very simply by making unfunded approvals past your bonding authority, and just say, if anytime you miss it, because you don't really have the authority in law to reserve
But we're not
funds
really,
for anybody.
it's not really an unfunded approval. I mean, then you're locking yourself into what you're doing potentially for the next bond.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're approving a project to fund under a bond, I mean, I understand staff's needs and the others that, you got to match up what you're approving to how much money you have in the bank or will have in the bank. And
You could do it just as well through the potential process that you've discussed here of accumulating applications. If you just said anytime you don't have enough applications on the unfunded list that have met the 90-day certification request, just approve projects on that board date and give them apportionments the same day you approve the project. It solves the problem just as well. You don't have to go through this thing of making sure you kick somebody off the unfunded list or the application list, whatever you're calling it, before you can go forward with projects. You just, anytime you don't have enough money in the 90-day certifications, approve more projects. There you go.
so help me also understand, if I'm requesting funds, shouldn't I be requesting funds for a project I intend to move forward with? I mean, by the fact that if I'm a school district and I've been working on a project and I've got my approvals, if I'm going to the point where I'm requesting funds, shouldn't it be for a project that's going to move forward? If not, shouldn't I? I mean, is there?
I don't think anyone files an application thinking I'm not going to move this project forward. I'm just trying to get in line so that sometime in the future, the 2026 bond measure or whatever, that I'll be sitting there. I think everyone that files an application thinks they have a viable project that they're going forward with, and then things happen.
I agree with it, but that's my point. At the point you're filing for funds, I mean, at that point you should have a project that's viable that can move forward. Now, things happen, and we know with this huge recession that we're in and the collapse of the housing market, we know that drops of assessed valuations, we know that changes it. But the problem, the dilemma we have is how do we make sense of all this so that we can get money to the projects that are ready to go forward? I don't want to necessarily penalize them, but come back in the next program or get in the bottom of the line. But for those that are waiting, we're taking up that capacity.
And I understand your position. I don't have any problem with that position, quite frankly. But I think there are ways to resolve the issue without this, pardon my use of the term, penalty that you're trying to put on districts that have issues that have come up that they can't make a 90-day when they could have made an 18-month. You know what I mean? And maybe something's going to change in the next 6 months and they can make it. And so they would be a shovel-ready project the next time.
Give me an example. What is there in between 90 and 18 months? I mean, I can't.
I'm sorry, I couldn't quite hear you.
They're not ready to go forward in 90 days, but 18 months seems to me like an awfully long period.
Well, you just remember that whatever we do in regulatory process is going to take a while. So that's going to take a long time.
Right.
So it's not going to be, we're not doing this that, next week, if you're not ready next week, you're history.
Right.
Okay, so by the time the regulatory process takes effect and it affects that disbursement, that's when whatever we decide to do. So we're in effect, by virtue, the way the process works, we're actually giving them time and number notifications if we choose to.
I think I'm arguing with you.
Yeah. So
the question there begins. I'm not trying to penalize it, but it's come back to us when you're ready to start.
Yeah. Mr. Hagman.
No, I was going to put that in the motion, Mr. Chair. By the time staff takes a look at this, it's going to be well past Christmas holidays. Next to funding, basically, let's implement the new regs of one Passover after the next thing. That way, everyone has 3 or 4 months down notice. We have the next funding cycle. They're not going to be kicked off if they miss that one because one of the regs in place. But the next time it comes up, which will probably be 6 months after that even, or whatever the case may be, now it's almost 9 months of notification, but we have the consistency for the rest of the year and a half we have funding. So I make the motion of 1, but have it not go in effect till after the next funding round.
Moved and seconded.
Thank you.
So that's 1 for all types of
All
projects.
treated equally. Moved and second.
So can we clarify that including all the projects, CTE charters, everything, or just
No,
new construction
the
modernization?
and new construction.
Okay.
I think you made a good point in terms
Thank
of
you.
the other programs should be exempted. You and Barbara made a good point. Any additional comments from the public? Okay. All in favor say aye. Aye. Oppose? Nay? Ayes have it. Thank you. Tab 12.
Tab 12, facility hardship discussion.
All right, we are on tab 12, page 212. The purpose of this item is to provide recommendations to the board for the processing of facility hardship applications. Last month, the board directed staff to formulate a discussion item on this after we informed the board that there are several projects on the workload list that we've received but are beyond the current available bond authority. Facility hardship program replaces projects or provides replacement or rehab funding for projects that have a health and safety issue. It also includes projects that are under the SEISMIC mitigation program. For the purpose of this item, we are not referring to those projects, the SEISMIC projects, because they have their own carve-out of bond authority, which we currently have available. On page 259 in the reports section of our agenda, we have a list of projects that are in the new construction category but are currently beyond the authority available to us. On page 260 and 261, we have a list of modernization projects, which also includes projects that are beyond our current authority to process. On that list of modernization projects, we currently have 7 projects for approximately $8 million in requests that are noted with project number 58 that are facility hardship projects. Currently, the regulations require us to process modernization applications in date order received. If we continue that process, that means these 7 projects will never be funded. After today's consent agenda, we'll have approximately $44.6 million left in modernization authority, which we expect to use up at the December board. So what we are making is 3 recommendations to the board to address these facility hardships before that happens. The recommendations start on page 214. We're recommending the board approve the expedition of processing of in-house facility hardship projects, that $8 million, for placement on the unfunded list so they can be moved to the top and eventually receive cash. The second recommendation we are moving is to prioritize future projects that come in. Those 7 projects all have DSA approved plans, CDE plan approvals. They are essentially shovel-ready projects to move forward, but as it is right now, they won't ever receive bond authority or funding. We're also, so recommendation 2 is actually as we get new applications in that have full sets of plans, we're recommending that we approve those ahead of other modernization projects that are beyond authority. And they would get prioritized for future authority that gets returned to the program through closeouts or rescissions, like we just talked about in the prior item. The third recommendation we're requesting is that the board continue processing facility hardship conceptual approval requests. What that allows school districts to receive is approval that the project meets the preliminary criteria under the program so they can move forward with the planning of the project and eventually submit design or construction plans. With that, our recommendations are approve all 3 of those recommendations.
Ms. Moore.
I'll move staff recommendations.
Been moved. Is there a second? Moved and seconded. Any additional comments or questions from board members? Any comments from the public? Seeing none.
Actually,
I'm sorry, Senator.
I'm going to definitely vote for the motion, but I do hope that we will look at, again, how to deal with the responsibility of ongoing maintenance. And this gets back to the roof, that there's because I've been told that, I know that in my district, there are some districts that have built in, when you get a bond to build a new school, and you know that in 10 years you're going to have to replace the roof, you write that into the bond. And then it doesn't become a recurring item. So this is just to, something that I think we're going to need to look at in the future. But obviously, if we have a building that's danger to the health and safety of the children and the teachers and the people who work in the building, all of the staff, we need to deal with that.
Okay. Well, thank you. It's been moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Ayes have it. Thank you. Next item.
We're actually
Withdrawn.
Right.
We are on the school facility program session mitigation program status.
Yeah, we're actually on tab 12, which
Tab 12.
yeah, with the report section.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
Yeah. So we just wanted to quickly give the board an update about where we're at with the SEISMIC program. Since Proposition 1D was passed in 2006, it was up to $199.5 million was available for seismic upgrades. With that, the structure of the criteria that was established was most vulnerable. Also associated with that was the spectral acceleration, which had to be 1.68 or higher. We obviously know that there were some challenges with some of the projects or districts moving forward with that particular criteria. So during 2006 through 2011, we only had 3 projects that came through for funding. That represented only $4.7 million. So the board obviously had an interest to increase participation, and back in June 2011, they did broaden the program to increase the Type 2 buildings that qualified for funding. We expanded the program from 8 Type 2 buildings to 14 Type 2 buildings. They also deleted the criteria for 1.68 acceleration. That was dropped. They also created new eligible criteria in which addressed the structural deficiencies posed in a seismic event that dealt with also faulting, liquefaction, and landslide. All these also had to come with engineering reports and geo-survey reports as well. We also heard feedback from some of the stakeholder community about challenges for startup evaluations. So we did receive a $250,000 grant from the Seismic Safety Commission. With that grant, we created a template to establish eligibility. So folks would get this template evaluation and determine whether or not they were eligible for seismic funding. Even though we've expended the funds for those free evaluations, that template is still being used by the Division of State Architect. And at that time, 20 buildings did meet the criteria as determined. And as a result of the new regulations in place, an additional 149 facilities now qualify. So when districts come in for eligibility, there's also a number of different steps they have to meet in order to move forward with a final approval. And once they receive a final approval from the Division of State Architect, then they can submit their application for funding. So put it in perspective, we actually have over $18.6 million in projects that we're processing for the seismic program. The regulations that the board adopted back in June 2011 were put in effect early September of last year. So there has been progress made with those applications since the program has been broadened. We understand currently that there's 2 projects in the plan approval stage, which is the final stage at the Division of State Architect, and those projects could be submitting funding applications. So I think the broadening the criteria did increase the participation. We did have only $4.7 million that went through the program during that prior 5-year period back in 2006 to 2011. So the program is in effect working, or at least moving projects forward. So with that, we also wanted to provide the board updates. As the projects are moving forward through the Division of State Architect in the various approval stages, the Division of State Architect is communicating with those districts to let them know what the next steps are. Likewise, our office has been communicating with those districts. So as they start proceeding, we do notify them as far as how they can access the funds and if we can be of any assistance. So there's numerous contacts with the district on how they can proceed for funding. There have been additional contacts to try to weigh out when those projects will be moved forward. So we're looking to have some updates and perhaps some projections of when those additional projects will be coming through the pipeline for funding. We did announce last month there was some earthquakes that actually went down in Imperial County that impacted Brawley. We did send staff out on October 3rd with the Division of State Architect. Not only they got an eligibility assessment, but we also were down to assist whether or not they can evaluate for funding or qualify for funding. Even though we know that some of the damage was isolated, some of the districts will qualify for more funding because they do have the eligible Type 2 buildings. So again, that's a great opportunity for us to come down and provide them a system, and they actually will qualify for additional funding. So we're going to be monitoring those projects as they move forward. And with that, I'll open up to any questions.
Any questions? This is an information item.
I just would be interested at some point if maybe the Division of the State Architect could tell us a little more about the 169 applications that are in the pipeline in that office.
Well, well, probably we can qualify that statement. The 169 buildings did qualify. They met the eligibility criteria. So it's pretty much up at that point. The districts have to come back to the local community and establish whether or not they have to rehab or replace those facilities. So there's a lot of time and commitment at the local level to make those decisions and turn around plans.
Could you define qualify? Have they been determined that, you know, by engineers that they're not safe to have students in them? Or are these the buildings where they said you have this type of construction and you're in this zone, and so you might want to take a look at them?
They have to be a Category 2 building, as defined in the AB 300 report. That's the first criteria. Then they have to demonstrate one of the building collapse hazards, whether it's ground shaking, faulting, liquefaction, or landslides. If they have those situations, then they have to provide a report from an engineer justifying that there is an unacceptable risk to the students. Those, I think, are the preliminary tests to qualify for the eligibility. Then you pursue whether you're going to be replacing, rehabilitating.
Right. So do we know that those 169, are they the ones that fall into?
Yes.
But have they done the engineering to say the schools aren't safe? Because I remember when we had this committee, we went through it all, and you know, you could have the building type and the other, but it doesn't mean the building structurally may still be sound. So what we were asking was, okay, rather than try and lock it into a specific shaking factor or this or that if a building is not safe and it falls into the, you know, seismic zone or whatever, we want to replace it. And we were trying to simplify. So
you do need to have an engineering report that indicates that there's a high probability of collapse it could be localized collapse in the building, and that safety of students and staff is at risk.
They're not safe to be occupied. So my question is, are these 169 buildings, do they have the engineering's report saying they're not safe, or are they ones that are potentially not, but they still have to do the engineering work to determine, you know, whether or not they're safe or what needs to be done?
They haven't determined that they have a problem.
They have or haven't?
They have.
So they have engineers.
They have engineer reports. The Division of State Architects reviewed them and concurred.
All right.
Yeah, so then let me just ask staff, do we have an estimate of the total, of the amount of money that it would take to actually fund these 169 projects? It would just give us a better idea of what the drawdown might be on this account, since there is $188 million left.
The next step for a district, once you get eligibility established, you have to go through a process at the local level to determine what the cost is to rehabilitate, whether you can even rehabilitate or not. And so you look at the cost of replacement and you compare that to the cost of doing seismic mitigation on the existing building, and then you come back into DSA in an intermediate step and establish with DSA what the minimum work required is. And so unless the projects have come and done that, then we won't have an idea yet what the total demand may be for the funds.
So we don't know.
Not yet. That's correct.
But basically it's a 50-50 program, so chances are there are not going to be enough funds because isn't it likely to cost more than $2 million per project?
It really is going to depend on the buildings, the number of buildings, the type of construction, a whole lot of issues. So we're going to need to let it play out a little bit.
Well, I would move we accept the report.
Thank you. Do we accept the report? Thank you.
Next item is the annual legislative update.
This is also another report. We provide the board an annual summary of the bills that have been chaptered that may have been related to school facilities. We have listed 7 of them with preliminary comments. At this point, we don't believe that we have any significant or substantive regulatory amendments from these bills, but this is just informational for the board. If we do need to provide regulatory changes, we'll bring it to the board for further discussion.
Great, thank you. The 3-month workload?
Yeah, we have 3-month workload to present. It's on page 236. Not sure if there's any questions.
Then the last is tab 17. The date for the remaining, we don't meet next month.
Right, we meet December 12th.
Thank you.
And we'll be bringing projects forward for cash.
Okay, great, thank you. And then we have the SFP unfunded list, the workload list, emergency repair, the facility hardship. Ms. Buchanan, you're on your program review subcommittee that you had a meeting today. I'm wondering if the board would be interested in moving the PIW workload stuff that we've talked about. It's currently in the implementation committee and has been there for a while. If you recall, right now there's data being gathered on modernization, new construction, and we thought that it'd be good to expand. And I'm just wondering if the board wants to sort of, we want to use that information to sort of inform the conversation and whether or not it belongs in your committee to elevate it and to kind of flush it through. Thoughts?
Well, Ms. Moore today was talking about having more data. We also were talking about how do we know the grants are adequate and all of that, and what, adequate schools. So I think it probably would be good for us to sit down and talk about it. I don't know, ultimately, we may make a recommendation to the board to go back, but I think we probably ought to look at all this as part of our, the in-depth analysis we're going to do, and the goal of streamlining the program. I don't know how. Are there any other comments?
Thank you. I would, first of all, like to comment that Ms. Buchanan did a wonderful job at the subcommittee. I think we had everyone agreeing this was long overdue, so it's great. Unfortunately, we're at the tail end of the program. We may change, but it's a good educational piece, and there's a lot for, I'm a number guy, and so I think it'd be great to add that to it, but it's just it was a great meeting. I think we're going to be very busy in the off season here, trying to keep up with all the different categories and different sub-meetings we're going to have. We're going to try to take one at a time, so I think it's a great component to it. But she did a great job.
Yes, and I definitely indicated that the need for data. I think I'd want to see additional data than just the project information worksheet, and we talked about that in the meeting today. I did have one question, and perhaps Mr. Savage, you can help with that. Has the implementation committee completed their work on this subject, or is it something that is ready to be handed over, or what?
Actually, we're pretty close. I mean, the last piece that we were doing after some streamlining work was to look at adding modernization, and at our meeting this month, we're very, very close to having something that's ready to come back to the board, actually.
So would it be that you complete your work and then it comes over to the subcommittee? Is that your suggestion?
Well, traditionally, the implementation committee work would come directly to the board.
Okay.
I guess from my perspective, it's been in the implementation committee for a while, quite a while. And so, I think it would be good to sort of elevate it and trying to figure out what it is we want, since it is board members who sit on the subcommittee and who ultimately have to vote, instead of just staff and trying to resolve it with interested parties. I think the part I like about raising things to the subcommittee is the board members get engaged, and people are much more public about where they stand and don't stand on issues, and that seems to move things along rather than just sort of sit there in the implementation committee for another 6, 7, 10, 12, 15 months. 18 months seems to be popular. So that's sort of my thing is, we have an interest, we're doing program review, and KIW to me seems integral part of program review, but it was a board action to send it to implementation committee. I like it to be a board action to pull it back. I mean, it's not an action in the purest sense. It was sort of, you know,
I guess
the committee as a whole.
I guess what I would support is that if indeed the implementation committee is close to completing their work on it, complete it, and then provide it to the subcommittee. You know, if you need one more meeting to do that, I think that would be appropriate. I'd hate to cut it off in the middle of, if it's close to completion, of then coming forward to the new subcommittee.
How about we recommend it gets moved, but we put it at the end of the list, because we got a lot of other ones to go through too, because we're meeting, what, in December and January already, so by January, hopefully they'll be done.
But if we put it at the end of the list, are you saying that it's done in the implementation committee level?
No, I think what I'm hearing say is, okay, you do have another couple meetings. What I'm hearing say is that you do have a couple meetings, since you do have other issues on your plate right now. So if the implementation committee can resolve those issues in the next couple meetings that they have,
Great.
then if they can't resolve those issues, then it gets bumped up to the subcommittee.
Yep.
And I would say, I think the subcommittee, even letting the implementation committee do its work, should be taking a look at it, because, you know, let's face it, it's pretty hard to go back now and change the current program. We're near the end, and I think it's, you know, I really do think any meaningful changes that we make are going to be made with the new program. And as we start to look at whatever data we have and we ask the questions we have, that should shed light on, you know, what do we need to make good decisions, what don't we need, and I would hope that it would add to the conversation that we're having.
And I think, too, that there is data already from the PIWs that should come forward to that subcommittee already.
No, we talked about having those numbers when we work on the things. We're going to need the numbers regardless, but hopefully this will help.
Great, okay, thank you. So with that, then we'll do that. Anything else? Any public comment? Seeing none. I know there's some interest in high performance and SEISMIC stuff, and I'd rather work off on the sidebar and get that stuff taken care of before we bring it up to a board for conversation. So thank you. With that, we adjourn.